Based on our current understanding of the world and through science, it seems like the hypothesis of determinism is more likely than its opposite, free will. However, if that's to be true, it would have massive impact on the way we tend to consider meaning and purpose, as we usually do currently. It also has massive impacts on our justice system, but that's tend to be a more well-known aspect of this debate. Um, and so in this video, I'd like to speak about that impact, which I don't see so many people talk about, and I think it has to be acknowledged. So this video was spurred by watching a video from Dr. K on his channel Healthy Gamer, and he was talking about biological determinism, and that's what got me inspired to address this topic. Um, it also deals with the same topics I mentioned in my video on time travel and what it seems to imply on this debate, namely that determinism, it seems to be using the assumption that determinism is true, usually time travel. Okay. So just a little disclaimer, I'm not an expert on this topic. I mean, like I know I'm familiar with the general argument, but I don't know every single argument. I'm not like I haven't studied philosophy in academia, so maybe there are some aspects of the debate that I'm missing. And if you have some other arguments or some counters, whatever, do put them in the comment section. I just wanted to make sure that to make that clear. But I still had some strong reactions, we'll say, to some of what I was seeing, and I felt like it might be useful for some people for me to share my thoughts. So let's start by kind of giving a little recap of Dr. Sk's videos. I won't put extract, I'll just explain quickly, and then it'll be in the description if you want to watch it, and then you can have the full context. So his video talks about biological determinism, and it's basically centered on some studies which seem to imply that basically we make decisions before we are consciously aware of them. So I think like the way the experiment he talks about is set up is you have to choose to press a button or flip a lever, and you have to choose which hand you want to use, so right or left. And once you've made your choice, you tell the experimenters, and then you do the action. And basically, based on measuring some of your biological data, so I don't remember if it was blood flow or something like that. Anyways, they can kind of see in your body the decision happening, and basically, it seems like your body is already set on the specific option you're going to do before you tell the experimenter what your choice is, which would seem to suggest that basically your body automatically or your brain automatically made the choice before you're aware that you've made the choice. And so the name of the video is why your choices aren't really yours, and it feeds back into this idea. So basically everything you do would then just be a cold chain of biological processes, and your neurons firing, and everything that happened to you beforehand. And so basically you're kind of making every choices automatically, and then you get the impression that you're making decisions, but that's just like kind of an illusion. Well, that's kind of the general premise, and then he uses it as a means to kind of give ways based on different of these experiments to hack yourself into making better automatic decisions, basically. That would lead more toward more successful and more fulfilling outcomes. And so, it's things like thinking about your options before, like if you want to stick to an activity, for example, going to the gym, things that will help do this is thinking about your option, how you might do it beforehand, making some predictions on what might be the outcomes of the different options you can choose, and once you have done the activity, to reflect back upon it. And that, so some kind of pretty simple things you can do that would, based on the results of those different studies, seem to make it more likely that you'll stick to certain choices and life routines, and that would make your life better. Well, that's kind of the general idea presented in that video. And so first of all, I'd kind of like to add a bit of nuance to these findings. So it's an interesting study, but I think some people take it a little bit too strongly. Like a lot, most studies in science, it suggests some things, and then you need to do a lot more research to confirm the findings and to understand better what's going on. So to just kind of nuance some of the findings, I think that basically the researcher can predict what you're going to pick before you say you're going to pick it accurately 60% of the time. So that's more than the average if you just do it randomly, which would be 50. But it's not like incredibly high either. It's still relatively low, so that's one thing. Then it's not clear what exactly is being measured. Some people now I don't know. I haven't read the study, so maybe they go deeper into it. But just like as a general, some general limitation, we could say even. Nevertheless, it's not sure. It could be is the delay in your consciousness or in between the point where you choose and you communicate it. So there could be a bit of leeway there. And then we also don't know how applicable this is to any type of choice, right? Because these are, now, I mean, given that it's in an experimental situation, you're probably going to think about it a little bit more than you would normally just choosing which hand you're going to use. But it's a pretty trivial decision. So we don't know how that would work on a long-term important decision that you have to do and you think about for a long time. So, you have to take the results with a grain of salt. It's not exactly sure that it does mean that biological determinism is true once and for all, and we can be sure of that. So I was surprised to see that Dr. K didn't mention at all this the important impact that it would have existentially if determinism is true. So I was kind of scrolling the comments, and most people seem to be pretty happy and relieved at the idea of determinism. And I think most of it, at least from what I read, seemed to be because it relieved them of guilt, or and it kind of relieved them of responsibility to an extent, because if their choices aren't theirs, then they don't have to feel so bad about where they are at, or some failings or whatever. And I personally have no, like, I'm not interested in people being super mopey and self-flagellating and feeling bad about themselves. Like, I don't think that's like, overall, I'm not saying that shame and guilt can never be productive or have some good purpose, but I think it's kind of overdone mostly. And like, I don't really care if you want to, I don't need people to feel bad about themselves. So that's fine if you want to do that. But I do feel that sacrificing free will in exchange to get that result, I'm not sure is the best idea, or at least it's got some big consequences that I'm not sure people would be happy with or seem to even realize. And so I wasn't really seeing that perspective much at all in the comments. I did find like a couple of hints towards it, and then there was a thread where some people pointed it out, and there was kind of some back and forth. And I wanted to share my point on my view on this whole topic. So I wrote this pretty this pretty long rant as a comment, and I posted it. And then I realized later that it had been deleted. So I wrote it again a whole second time, and I had to try and do different things for it to not be automatically deleted by the YouTube. I guess it's probably a filter, like word filters, and I guess because it's such a big channel, the amount of, basically, if there is a word that it finds on your message, it just deletes it automatically. Probably that's what it is. So I'm not sure exactly what word I was using that wasn't good, but anyways, I wasn't able to post it. So I decided instead, might as well repurpose this general idea to make a video. And so here we are. But just like as a as a warning for you, right now I don't have any filters in my comments because I don't have nobody almost comments, so I don't need to filter bots and this kind of stuff. But if you do write a long comment, do copy it somewhere else before you publish it on YouTube, because it might just delete it instantly, and it doesn't notify you or anything. So it's pretty, the first time it happens, you're pretty disconcerted. All right, so now let's move on to kind of explaining and differentiating determinism and free will and the implications, because to be very clear on what I mean and the different impacts. All right, so I will be using this board and this visual representation to explain some of the concepts I want to talk about. And you can think about it if you've ever done, if you've ever played video games where you have different choices you can make, and they kind of lead to different, um, endings, or it's kind of this decision tree. This is kind of the general idea. It's a good metaphor to think about this, right? So here we have a branching tree of decisions. Obviously, it's very simplified compared to reality, but you need to be able to draw it. So if we kind of got at an arbitrary point in time, you have to do a decision, and you've got different options you can choose, and then it leads to another choice where you have different options and you can choose, and etc. And so it keeps branching on like this. Okay, so when it comes to this issue of determinism versus free will, there's a lot of kind of subtle wordplay, word tricks that happen, where a lot of people, for example, the definition of free will is pretty contentious. There's a lot of different ways to define it, but there's like some important differences. So we'll use this to explain what I mean. So, right, basically, as I said in my video with the time travel, determinism is the idea that everything is just the result of a causal chain. And usually, right, it's associated with philosophical materialism. So this idea that everything in the universe is composed of matter, and even our consciousness basically is just like an emergent property of the neurons in our brain, and it's just like causal chains caused by the laws of physics and electrical impulse, and basically everything we do is just a causal step, and it's necessitated by what came beforehand, right? So it started the Big Bang, and then it's just basically only one thing can happen. There's only like one destiny, so to speak, and it's only one way things could happen. So if we go here, so we'll use the example of like a person that has to do an important life choice, okay? So we have two figure cases. The first one is free will, and the second is determinism. And so, for the purpose of this example, let's say you have found the love of your life, or at least you've found a romantic partner, with which you have a super good match, and everything is going well. And your partner wants to start having a family. There's like maybe some time constraint. I'm keeping things a little bit vague so we can self-insert. But okay, so for this reason, this other person really wants to start building a family, and that's not really negotiable. Like it needs to be now, or it's going to break the relationship. But the problem is, you've dreamed of doing a specific career, maybe let's say like a film career, okay, and you got now an opportunity to work within the spheres where you could launch your career and make it very likely that you'll be able to do what you've always dreamed of doing. The problem is it will take a lot of time, and you probably won't have the resources to raise a family, at least for a very long time. So basically, it's kind of incompatible. You got to choose either, you kind of pursue your career, but you kind of sacrifice your family. In this case, your partner is probably going to leave you to find someone with who they can build a family quicker. Or basically, you kind of give up on this dream and you find a job that's not as interesting to you, but allows you to make enough money to support your family. And then I added this third option for entropy, we'll say. And it's just you decide that all of this complexity and stress is too much, and so you just move to Peru to become a llama shepherd. So now let's talk about a concept which is determinacy versus indeterminacy, right? So determinacy corresponds to causality. Basically, every event is determined by previous events based on causes, right? It's determined by previous causes. So for example, right, if we take the choices that I've listed, they're not completely random. They're based on different things that have happened up to now. So, right, you've been interested, for example, when you were a kid, you really loved movies. So that's and you connected real passions toward it. That's what caused you to want to work in cinema. And then you've met someone, and you value different things. You were raised in different ways, in specific ways that made it so, and you have specific preferences that made it so this specific partner was a good match, and because of your choice, you've made it up to now in this relationship. So, and even for the llama, maybe, I don't know, you've got a specific love for llamas. So all of these choices happen for our cause. They're based on previous causes. They have a cause, right? They're not completely random, right? Because one thing that tends to happen is this kind of duality between 100% determinacy, which means, like everything is determined um, by previous causes, and basically there's only one way things can happen. So in this case, basically because of the person you are and your brain, the way it works, and everything that's ever happened in the universe up to now, and the laws of physics, actually, so there's this whole potential tree of decisions that could happen. Okay, technically, like conceptually, but technically, you'll only ever do always the same choice. So from your perspective, it'll appear as though you're considering all these choices, and you could choose those different passes. But basically, every time it only happens once. But if it happened again, based on the same starting um, causes, the same Big Bang and everything, how everything went up to now, you'll always choose basically the same option. So let's say in this case, it's option A. So here we have kind of a representation. If it was like in a video game and you had, your different dialogue choice, and you're facing your partner and you have to make your choice. And so, you've got the different choices you could pick. But basically, if you're in determinism, it looks as if you've got three choices, but technically all these 2-second choices are grayed out, okay? Because like you see them and you can think about them, but you'll never actually click on it because it's already set. And so this is the blue path that corresponds to this series of decisions. Basically, that's this specific road here or path is the only path that can ever exist because everything was already set instant before. So that's determinacy. Now, if you go at the other hand, which is 100% indeterminacy, then nothing is caused by anything else, or at least when it comes to choices. But that means that every choice you make is completely random because it doesn't depend on anything else before. That's not how we make our choices in everyday life, right? You make, as I said before, your choices are informed by other things that have happened beforehand, and other things that weren't in your control, or ways you were raised, your values, etc., etc. I just forgot to mention in the original video that the reason why indeterminacy matters, and this idea of 100% indeterminacy doesn't have to be the only option versus 100% determinacy, is because if nothing is determined, right, all your choices are random, and basically that means you don't really have free will anyways, because none of your choices are meaningful. You're not basing them on anything, it's just completely random. And it's back to square one. It's like some form of free will, but it's not meaningful at all. So it's not really anything interesting that we would normally describe as free will. So if you put it as a false dilemma where your only option is 100% determinism or determinacy and 100% indeterminacy, in both versions you don't have free will. And so if free will is to survive, it has to be somewhere in the middle where there is some level of determinacy and consequences and causality, but still some ability to choose between a few different options and shift or have an influence on destiny and allow it to diverge. Sometimes I see a bit of a false dilemma between 100% determinacy or 100% indeterminacy. You can still have free will and some level of determinacy, right? So you're still making some decisions based on um, things that have happened before, as a causality, etc. But basically, you have the choice between some branching passes. Okay, given this same situation, you could actually, really, in this case, choose those different passes, right? And so technically, there's like one potential future or one potential destiny in which you become, like this massive movie director. One where you just build a nice family, but you never have like this glorious career, and one where you're a shepherd in Peru. And all of these could happen. It just depends on your choices, right? You're not constrained to this one path. You could technically branch. And so, see this, it's not a completely infinite tree. Now, in reality, it would be a lot bigger, but it wouldn't be completely infinite, right? You still have a finite set of choices restrained by previous causes, but you can choose and you can shape your future. And that's where the language becomes a little bit muddled, because technically, in the deterministic framework, you're still influencing your futures through your choices, right? Because you made that choices and it influenced the future, but there was only one thing you could ever choose. And so technically, you lose your ability to shape the future. I mean, you're shaping it, but there's only one way you can shape it. So you don't have any choice. You don't really have any agency, and you don't own the choices you do because there is only one choice you could have ever done in any given situation. So let's consider some impacts, okay, so that what this means on the way we usually think about meaning. And like usually we think that this whole idea of purpose, significance, okay, you make a significant choice because you, through your choices, you shaped yourself, you shaped the future, you made a statement about who you are, and you changed your destiny based on your choice, right? This presupposes that there are several possible destinies that can happen, okay, and you choose one. So maybe in one, you chose that your career, to take the example I gave before, that your career is the most important thing, and that's what has to go before everything else, and you're this artist, and so that's what the statement you're making about this yourself. That's what you've the part of the future you've collaborated into creating through your choices. And there's another future where you became like you created the greatest family, but in exchange you had to sacrifice some of your career. But and so you made a statement about this was what was meaningful to you, was you cared more about making a family with a specific person. And there was the last one where you went in Peru. So through your actions, you're making a statement of meaning. If you lose the actual ability to make real choices that can diverge from the one path of causality, then you lose significance because you didn't make any statement about who you are and what's meaningful to you. You couldn't, it wasn't your will. You're just like a more complicated version of a leaf blowing in the wind, right? The leaf, I mean, technically, so the leaf has a specific shape and it's got a specific weight and it's got a specific texture, which is going to influence how it's going to float based on the wind. But it's not choosing anything. It was just made this way, and so because it's made this way, it interacts with a lot of physics a specific way, and so it just blows in the wind. If you're a human, so as a human, you're just like a more complicated version of this leaf. So you're kind of a mixed, you're not really a subject anymore, and that you can't, or you are a kind of a hybrid version between a subject and an object, kind of a subject. And so it's kind of the worst possible outcome of any, because you're self-aware, so you have a subjective experience of what's going on, whereas most likely the leaf does not. So you can feel yourself and witness yourself being blown by wind, but you have even enough self-awareness to realize that that's what's going on. And if determinism is true, figure it out that it's true, and in so doing, realize that you're just following through on rails. There's nothing. Everything is predetermined before you. You don't have any input into destiny. Just like the leaf is just blowing in the wind based on its features, uh, so are you blowing through life and making your decision based on predetermined things on your biology and what happened in your life up to now. And so in this way you're completely dispossessed, right? And I think that some people in the comment thread I wanted to reply to, pointed out that the best of free will, so to speak, is worse than nihilism, right? And nihilism is just this idea that there is no meaning, nothing really has any meaning in life. And I agree, the absence of free will is worse than nihilism, because even if nothing makes sense in itself, you can create meaning through freedom, right? That's kind of the existential solution. Through the choices you make, you make a statement about yourself. You give meaning to things by sacrifice. You choose one thing rather than another, and in this sacrifice, you say that the thing you chose was meaningful in contrast to the other. And at the end, you can look back on your life, and you've carved, at least partially, right? Because a lot of things are out of your control, but at least some way, even if it's very small, you still geared, you still shifted, steered life towards a specific direction and made a statement about what's meaningful to you. And you've made significant choices. If determinism is true, then nothing is significant. The way we understand purpose, that doesn't make sense. You have to change completely the way we tend to think about it. And so, there's also the whole idea of, and I mentioned a little bit earlier with this whole idea of being relieved from guilt, but technically, if determinism is true, then no one is responsible for what they do. They're just leaves blowing in the wind. Some people happen to be ethical based on our standards. Some people didn't, but like nobody, there's no virtue, so to speak, because nobody is in control of their choices. There was only one way that it could happen. So the whole idea of punitive justice is kind of weird on this, based in this system. But a lot of determinists do acknowledge this and strive to change a little bit, at least, the way we think about justice. But even then, think about that. The thing is, under determinism, you control nothing. Okay, if whether I'm going to make an argument, okay, like I didn't choose this, like that was what was going to happen, or I chose it, but I didn't really choose it. This was the only way I could think that could happen based on what happened up to now and the way I work. Similarly, whether you're convinced, whatever reaction you have to this, like it's not in your choice, it's always going to happen. Even if you have to think a lot about it, even if it takes time, everything of that is predestined. There's only one way it can happen. So, and this is kind of the crushing, like, what's the point that happens if determinism is true? Like basically, no matter what you do, okay, even if you choose to kill yourself because you're like, this is awful, like I don't know, like I'm kind of stuck, like whatever I do, even if, like, the idea that determinism is true, it like stucks you in paralysis and you can't do anything, and you're like, oh my god, like what does this mean? Well, that's also what was going to happen once you learn determinism. Whatever you do, you don't control, and there's no resisting determinism. Okay, like if it's true, you can't escape it. Even if you commit suicide, that's like there's no escape, you're still just playing the game. And in this way, you're utterly dispossessed, right? Even in a universe where God exists and is like a super tyrannical figure that's, completely evil, if you do have free will, you could express your dissent and tell him to go fuck himself. And even if you have completely no power and you're going to get bound to hell forever, but you still have this little snippet, this little smidge of control, of way of expressing, of voicing yourself. Under determinism, there is no escape. Everything you do is out of your control. And I think that's got like severe implications. Like it's like a big thing, and it's puzzling to me that so little people seem to understand that it's a thing, right? Because if we go back to the video from Dr. K, it's all about this idea that basically you're using determinism to hack yourself, to hack your automatic decisions in order to move towards a better outcome that you want. But in doing so, you still, if under determinism, you don't control that either. Like you just happen to find some tools and learn and be influenced by something that someone else said, and you were going to do it. But there is only one way things can happen. So it goes back and it kind of invalidates everything, or it just puts everything into question. And yeah, so that's like this is a big impact. And I gotta admit that I find it hard to empathize with people that don't have this reaction. So, like for me, it's just so different from the way my brain works. I really don't understand how people can be okay with this, like, or like it's no problem, it's no bother, it doesn't, it's just like whatever. For me, that doesn't make any sense. So if you have a way to try, you could explain it to me in the comments. If you like, if you've got some way of explaining it, I don't know if that, because maybe for you it's so instinctual that you don't care, that it's hard to explain it in the same way that it's so instinctual for me that it totally cares, that maybe it's really hard to explain to each other what's going on. But I'd be very interested to understand what's going on and why people differ so much on, like, for something that feels so drastically important to me and to other people too, from based on the comments, but it seems to be a very small minority. All right, and so in this same vein, I want to address some of the answers from people that subscribe to determinism on kind of making peace with it and why I think it misses the point, or it's not good enough. And this also goes back to compatibilism, which is this idea that free will and determinism can kind of coexist. And depending on how you define it, that's a difficult part of this whole conversation, is that you can like change a little bit what you mean by a word, and it gets very hard to understand what we mean. But so one of the answers that was given from that I saw in the comments was basically, even if you don't control anything, you can still enjoy the experience. And it's kind of one of the analogies that was given is it's kind of, you're reading a book or you're watching a movie, the end already exists. It doesn't, your input doesn't matter, but you don't know what's going to happen and you can enjoy yourself in the experience. But basically it kind of turns life into just like a hedonistic treadmill. You're kind of just like, on for the ride, and sometimes you feel pleasure and sometimes you don't. And, you can kind of enjoy the experience, but you're basically like an NPC. It's like like, for me, that's not good enough. Like, there's no more purpose. It's just hedonistic, like you have fun, and so it makes it okay. But for people that want something more meaningful, some reason, some why, what's going on, are we doing this rather than something else? That's not a good enough answer. I mean, like, for me, it doesn't address the core of the problem, that we care strongly about agency, about, like, that's like maybe tantamount to the way we function. That's like the primary values. That's not good enough. I mean, at least for me, and I know that for other people, apparently that's not good enough either. Another thing is ways to make free will kind of survive with determinism, and this is compatibilism. So one of the description is basically, if you're not being coerced by someone else, so if someone is not putting a gun to your head and telling you to do something, then you have free will, because you're doing it, of yourself without external pressure. But that's more like consent or a lack of coercion, and technically that's a good thing. Okay, I'm like, yeah, I'm for a lack of coercion, but that's not free will. That's not what we care about when we have this debate versus free will versus determinism. So I think this is kind of a little magic trick to be like, ooh, if I really destroy a lot of what's interesting about free will, and I kind of make it this super weaker version, then it's compatible. Okay, yeah. So another version or another answer was, if you make choices that are very authentic, that are congruent, okay, and they're aligned with your values, and though they feel fulfilling, that's free will. Basically, you don't choose anything because you're still in that one linear track of destiny. But when on this linear track of destiny, you happen to make choices that are aligned with what you truly want, but are determined, but then that's when you are, that's free will. But then when you're doing choices that are unaligned, then that's not free will. But that's not free will. That's congruence. That's like being authentic, and I think that's a good thing. Also, I would say, try do your best to be congruent, but it's still not free will, and it misses the point. And so it's kind of frustrating when we have this type of discussion. Like, I feel, and maybe it's just because a lot of people don't care about this as strongly, but it feels somewhat insulting or dismissive when they kind of the best thing they can offer is these like flimsy, like, it doesn't address the core of the issue, at least for a couple of people, me included, and it feels, kind of dishonest. And I think it's fine if you think that determinism is more likely, and you think it's probably true, but I would like for the people who do believe this to acknowledge, like, that it really changes a lot on how we think about things, and it's got this drastic impact, this pretty disastrous impact on purpose. And I would like people to at least acknowledge that this is happening, and that, either they have a good solution or they don't, but at least, admit that that's what's happening. Part of why I was motivated to do this video and my answers in the first place is because some people are like, it's really a source of suffering, this whole quandary, right? Like, they're very depressed by the possibility that determinism is real, like, to the point of being just like really depressed, or really, it's a source of constant angst and rumination. And, so I personally have not succumbed to despair. So how do I do it? What can I offer? And I'm not saying that this will work for everyone. And, because there's a lot of things that kind of there's a more intellectual side of this, but there's also personality and previous, experiences, and a lot of things happen. So just like, the solution I can offer might not be good enough, but maybe it's something that can help a little bit, and that does emphasize and recognize the significance, and like how how existentially horrific lack of free will would be, instead of kind of, putting it under the rug and being like, yeah, whatever. Like, I do emphasize, and I do recognize that it's a big deal. So how do I kind of do it, right? So first of all, I agree that determinism seems pretty plausible. It's maybe more likely. Based on what we know, it seems more likely, because free will feels a little bit weird, or like it's harder to explain. It either have to be something supernatural that defies the laws of physics as we understand, or something based on quantum mechanics. And so, there's like a few potential explanation as how that would work. For example, like I was watching a video on Penrose and his hypothesis on basically part of the brain making decisions could be based on quantic indeterminacy, and that's why the human consciousness is incomputable. Anyway, I won't get too deep into this question. Maybe I'll put a link to that video. But even then, I think that's like trying to rely on this kind of scientific hypothesis and kind of clinging to it this desperately isn't exactly, in my opinion, the best way to go about this. Right now, as it stands, we don't know for sure. Right, one theory might seem more likely, but there's no absolute certainty. There's no, it's not set in stone, and I don't know. It might get closer and closer to this. Who knows? But for now, there's still some unknown. And as I said, if we go even further deeper in the rabbit hole, but if you go and look at my video on Pyrrhonism and in general, certainties and how we define truth is like less clear cut than we like to think. So there's more space. It's not exactly sure. So we have this situation. We have this very troubling potential hypothesis of determinism, which could be, which is pretty likely, but we're not sure either way. So, in my opinion, the best way to deal with this is to acknowledge that it could be, it's possible and even plausible, but nonetheless reject it as an act of existential survival and rebellion. And basically, and I think this can still be a rational choice. What you're doing is, since we can't have absolute certainty, absolute knowledge, instead we shift, right? Rationality is about making actions that lead toward a certain outcome, right? You're making actions that make sense and that are most likely to get you the outcome that you're wishing for, basically, at the end of the day. And it doesn't really, what we choose as an objective, a goal, isn't within really the purview of rationality itself. So if you shift your goal from absolute certainty to pragmatic quality of life, it still makes sense to, if you're not sure either way what of these options are true, to opt for the one that allows you to live without, wanting to be in absolute, lost in absolute existential horror. And so I think that it's a legitimate and still rational decision to just choose to believe in free will for your sake, because we can't know for sure. So it's not like you're lying, and it's not like you're pretending then afterward that, it's the only possible thing that could be. You do recognize the possibilities, you do recognize that determinism is a hypothesis and it's got good arguments for it, but still, you're making your choice based on what's available to you. And some people might find this hypocritical to an extent. I don't think it is, because it's transparent about its decision. And for me, it beats the hypocrisy of accepting determinism intellectually, but then acting my entire life as if I have free will, as if my choices are significant, as if I'm kind of participating in crafting my future. That for me feels like a lot less of a tolerable hypocrisy and inconsistency than choosing the option that allows me to live my best life given uncertainty. So that's my answer. If you're part of the people who are very disturbed by these types of questions, and like for you it's a big deal and you do think about this implication and maybe it's hard for you to live, hopefully this can help you a little bit. And that's the type of people I'm trying to kind of reach and help and communicate to with this video. So I can't ensure that my solutions or my ideas will be like the perfect solution, but maybe I can help a little bit. So if you're interested, you can find my contact information through my website. So if you go on thoughtfulinquiry.com/contact, or you can find a link to my website in all the descriptions of my video and basically on my about page on YouTube. And then you can send me an email, and I'd be happy to see if I can help you in any way. Now, I'm not making any grand promises, but I can give you the tools that, as someone who also finds this possibility really massive, and I had to kind of wrestle with it, what I've come up with as the best ways to kind of navigate uncertainty and this kind of existential approach to life. So hopefully that was useful and interesting to some people at least. that's my hope, that it could help some people, hopefully. I hope it was somewhat interesting. I know that it was pretty long, but there was a lot to talk about. If you'd like to see a bit of a more summarized and eloquent version of this, but with a little bit less detail, you can read the rant comment that I had written initially. It'll be at the bottom of the description under the timestamps. And yeah. Anyways, if you have like counter arguments or questions, you can send me comments, or you can contact me through my mail, as I said. Okay. I hope you found this interesting. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.